And now let's talk about the subject of not knowing. I find in many ways that one of the challenges we face is this perhaps unease with admitting that we don't know something. And I believe that in itself shouldn't be something that we should be ashamed of. I think it's something we should actually celebrate and encourage, because the desire to learn and the desire to know is what creates wisdom, is what creates understanding, and is what allows you to pursue knowledge. Now, let me qualify a few words that I've just mentioned: knowledge, wisdom, understanding. Now, the three of them are not the same. We often mistake and err in our judgment that having knowledge means you're wise. That's incorrect. We also make the mistake of assuming that having understanding means you're wise, and that in itself also is incorrect. Knowledge is acquired and obtained through information. If you search, you will find. So, as you gather information, you become knowledgeable. Knowledge is not power in itself. It is the potential of power if applied towards a predetermined objective or goal, and if realized. So knowledge comes through information. A lot of people are knowledge rich. A lot of people are information rich, but are still poor, both in mind, both in spirit, but also both physically. Now think about this. How many people have you met or do you know who maybe work as doctors or who work as perhaps personal fitness trainers? And the information and knowledge they have is not evident in their lives or their lifestyle. Have you ever seen a doctor or a counselor, or perhaps a psychiatrist, or perhaps someone who is a relationship therapist who, in the case of a relationship therapist, has had maybe 4 or 5 different marriages? Now, I'm not suggesting, or I'm not judging, but what that suggests to me from first observation is that they have this knowledge, but they don't know how to apply it. If you've gone through 4 or 5 different marriages, it means that you, as the lowest common denominator, need to sit in front of a mirror and realize that you play a part. And being the lowest common denominator, that perhaps you should work on yourself. Or maybe you've seen a doctor who teaches you to eat healthy, but isn't healthy, perhaps both in size and form and figure and posture. They don't look well. They have the information, they have the knowledge, but they don't follow it. Or maybe you've even seen someone who is a doctor who tells you to stop smoking, but is a chain smoker. They have the information, they have the knowledge. It doesn't mean they're wise. Understanding, on the other hand, comes from having the ability to use your higher faculty of your mind, of reasoning. One of our higher faculties is the reasoning faculty, and that allows us to think. And with that faculty, we can think inductively and we can think deductively. And by thinking deductively, we are allowed this unique ability to distinguish between what's right and what's wrong, what is good and what is bad. With the reasoning faculty combined with another higher faculty of the mind called perspective, or perception. I like to call it perception, but perception is simply perspective, seeing things from a different point of view. By combining the ability to think and the ability to see things from a different perspective, that allows you to develop what we call your ability to comprehend. Comprehension leads to understanding. So, for example, you might have a lot of knowledge. Imagine picking up a biological thesis or maybe a physics lecture. You don't really understand it, maybe upon first read. But as you start to study and reread and then ask questions and then think and consult both with yourself, with other people, what you find is that allows you to start acting in a deductive way, but also it allows you to start seeing perhaps the abstract in that. written documents, you can start seeing it in a different perspective. And that allows you to start to comprehend something that perhaps you never understood previously. So knowledge comes from information. Understanding comes from your ability to comprehend. The final aspect of that sequence is wisdom. Now, wisdom in itself comes through application of the knowledge you know based on what you understand. So I'll give you a classic example. Wisdom is not simply applying knowledge. No, wisdom is applying the essential parts of what you've acquired as knowledge, applying the areas that you understand, but doing it intelligently. So I like to use this example and say, imagine yourself as a carpenter. If you're a carpenter and you think that every tool and the world, if you look at the world as simply a nail, to a carpenter who has a hammer, all he's thinking about is anything that looks like a nail, I'm going to use a hammer on it. That in itself is not right. But the point is this, that information or knowledge is like having a tool. Understanding is knowing where to use the tool, when to use the tool. Wisdom is now knowing how to use the tool and applying and using that tool constructively. But this is where it gets interesting. Having the foresight to set down the tool when it's not necessarily required and looking for something else. That is wisdom. That is when you've combined knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. So you've taken information, you've comprehended the information, and now you've applied the information towards a predetermined objective. So think about a little baby. A baby who has a hammer will perhaps use it on a piece of glass, maybe on a window. Why? Because they don't have understanding. They have the tool, they have that information, but they don't understand it. And the reason they don't understand is because they haven't developed their reasoning faculty, and they cannot think inductively or deductively. They cannot reason. They don't have perspective. The same piece of tool, the hammer, in the hands of a skilled carpenter can produce the most beautiful piece of woodwork. Reason being, they've developed their understanding and they now know how to use the tool effectively to create a beautiful piece of art. So we, in many ways, we err in the fact that we sometimes feel that if we don't know, that is something we should be ashamed of. And I think that is in itself not really right. One of the greatest tragedies of mankind, one of the greatest errors that we make, and understand that in many cases, the biggest mistakes we make in life are not errors of omission. They're often errors of commission. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Errors of omission relate to things that you didn't do. Errors of omission relate to things that you knew enough to do something about it, but you refused to do anything. So I like to use this example of saying ignorance is something that we all should embrace. I believe personally that I am ignorant. There's so much I don't know. I was talking to a friend some time back and I said that I believe my life is probably 95% ignorance and maybe 5% of understanding, knowledge, and wisdom combined. And because I know that, I welcome learning. So one of the biggest mistakes we make is that we fail to learn, we fail to listen. And part of that failure leads to a life where we're not realizing our deepest potential. Ralph Waldo Emerson has a saying that I think is exceptional. He says, "Every person that I meet is superior to me in some way, and therefore I'm going to learn from them. Now just think about that very carefully. Every person that I meet is superior to me in some way, and therefore I will learn from them. This simply means, irrespective of what you think of the next person, there is something they know that you don't know. So you must approach every relationship, every conversation, every opportunity as a learner. Come from the place of ignorance, because you see, you can't learn without humility. And you can't learn from someone you don't admire or someone you don't respect. More importantly, you can't learn from someone you despise. So humility is one of the most important ingredients to learning. Because if you have a humble heart, then you'll be saying, maybe I don't know that much. And Confucius says it slightly differently. He said, and I paraphrase, he says, if I find myself amongst three, then I must learn from them or from one of them. Such a powerful statement. Very powerful. It's a different way of simply saying, there is so much I don't know. And because I don't know, I will position myself as a learner. And when the opportunity comes, I'm going to ask the right questions. I'm going to stay humble. I'm going to be what I call a disciple, which is I'm going to let myself be influenced by another person. And I believe that's how life should work. I think life should be approached from the basis of learning. Ralph Waldo Emerson's quote is powerful. Confucius is also powerful. If I remember Confucius rightly, and I paraphrased earlier on, but if I remember rightly, he was simply saying, whenever walking in a company of three, I will surely find someone I can learn from. That is incredible. That is incredible. Now let's go back to what I was talking about earlier on. Errors of omission and commission need to be identified. And I identify both of them using the two words, ignorance and stupidity. Ignorance is not knowing something. So for example, I am ignorant about a lot of things in life. There's some things I know about, some things I don't know. So I am ignorant. Ignorance is not knowing something. Stupidity is refusing to learn, even when you realize you don't know. Stupidity is rejecting knowledge. And so one of the things we must do is ensure that we're not committing errors of omission. It's okay to do errors and commit errors of commission, and that's just by being ignorant. But when you know that you don't know, but you refuse to learn, that is the problem. We all have to become students of life and become open to the idea of learning. You must go beyond information. We live in an information-rich society. And here is what makes the whole process easy. You and I have, and I believe this to be true, you and I have a unique purpose in life. We have a unique destiny, a unique assignment, a unique task, a calling. We have a set of passions that support that purpose. And we have been given gifts and talents and abilities, and we've been allowed to go through this beautiful journey we call life. And we're meant to take those gifts and talents and skills and use those gifts in a beautiful way to make this world a better place. And in doing that, we attract people to our lives. We make our environment much better. And part of that process requires you to understand how to gather knowledge, because no one is born wise. You develop wisdom, but you start by acquiring information. That information becomes knowledge. Then you have to take the time to study. That becomes understanding. Then you have to take the time to apply intelligently and course correct, and that becomes wisdom. And so I believe every one of us has the seeds of greatness and wisdom in us. But a seed remains a seed except it's planted in good ground or good soil. If I take a piece of seed and I put it on a table, on a marble table, it withers and dies because it's in the wrong environment. In the same way, if you take the same piece of seed and put it in rich soil, it blossoms, it grows, it germinates, it becomes a tree. Maybe it could be a tree that bears fruits, it produces fruits, and then you have more fruits and more trees. And in the same way, each and every one of us has this seeds of greatness and seeds of success and seeds of wisdom in each and every one of us. But we must plant it. Now, where do you plant that seed? In the soil of your mind. You must go into the soil of your mind and plant the seeds. And then water the seeds, nurture the soil, protect the garden, and develop the qualities that you've been given. Now, I started off talking about learning and why it's important to distinguish between information, understanding, and wisdom. And part of the reason I started there was simply to lead you down a path. I believe that more than 99% of the information available in the world today is not relevant to you and your success. I'm going to say that again. I believe that more than 99% of the knowledge or information available is not relevant to you fulfilling your destiny, to you fulfilling your purpose, to you achieving your potential, to you actually becoming the great person you were born to be. And the reason is because we have 7 billion people in the world today. 7 billion of us are all unique and different. We're not the same. There's never been another you before, there never will be, there never was. We're all different. And each of us has a unique destiny and a unique purpose. And the key to success in any area of life is understanding the few basic fundamentals of how things are meant to work within and in around the environment that you find yourself. And part of knowing what works requires perhaps an awareness that all of this information around is irrelevant, and your focus should be about trying to understand what can make your life better. I think the starting point should always be you learning and trying to understand, firstly, what your talents and gifts and skills, what you have an interest in, what you have a passion for, and then disciplining yourself to channel your study towards those key areas. That's the first. The second part, I think, is then going down what I call the 3 levels of understanding or consciousness: spiritual, mental, and physical. On the spiritual level, everyone should make an attempt to have an understanding about love, have an understanding about generosity, benevolence, have an understanding about purpose, about happiness, about sharing and joy. I think that's fundamental. It's really important to study those areas. When you come down from the spiritual level of consciousness or awareness down to the mental, here we come into the area of thoughts, and here we talk about the mind. And your mind you have an intellect and you have emotions. I think we should all study emotions, but more importantly, we should study how the mind works, because the way you use your mind determines the quality of your life, and your intellectual faculties determine the emotions you have. For example, I'll give you about 5 or 6 higher faculties: imagination, perception, reason, will, memory, intuition. All of those higher faculties can determine how you feel emotionally. Anytime you feel sad, I can promise you, at the same time, you're using your higher faculties wrongly. Anytime you feel euphoric, excited, you're using your higher faculties rightly. And the reason is because, as William Shakespeare said, nothing is either good or bad, but your thinking makes it so. Remember that feelings are preceded by thoughts. What controls your feeling is a thought. How you think determines how you feel. How you feel will determine what you do in terms of your actions. Your actions, if repeated, become habitual. They become habits. Your habits determine and ultimately create your character, and your character determines your destiny. So, how you use your higher faculties determine the emotional state you have. Now, think about your memory as a higher faculty. I can ask you to go back in time and remember something that happened to you in the past, maybe in the past 6 months, and bring up a memory of something pleasing and exciting. And I can promise you, at the point where you're doing that, your feelings are changing if you do it rightly, because you're going back into your memory and you're remembering something that happened which was loving, something kind, something that was beautiful. Now, at the moment you started doing that, you were going back into your memory, but at the same time, you were connecting with your imagination. You see, imagination is where you can actually create, where you can actually recreate, where you can actually revise any experience you've had or any experience you wish to have. So I can shut my eyes now and I can imagine myself in 10 years. And I can imagine myself the way I want to be. And just that process of imagining and visualizing in the screen of my mind's eye the life that I want to live, my emotions are changing. I'm starting to produce a few things. For example, the natural chemicals that make us feel good. I'm starting to produce endorphins. I'm starting to produce perhaps some level of serotonin or oxytocin or even dopamine, depending on the level of my thoughts or what I'm thinking about. So emotions often are created by the motion you allow your mind to go through. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail of the mind because that's not the purpose of today's session. The point I'm trying to make is one of the areas you should study in life is the mind and your mental faculties. Now, underneath the spiritual and the mental consciousness and awareness is physical or material. And on this level, we start learning about health. We know about financial wealth. We know about how to get what you want in any area of your life. There are fundamental laws on this level that govern our success. The law of cause and effect. Some people call it the law of sowing and reaping. Science calls it the law of action and reaction. Some people call it the law of karma. You start learning about the law of attraction, how what you do and how you use your thoughts create what you're attracting to your life. So there are areas that you should study in life, and I think part of your life journey should be continuous learning and studying in these areas. And what I found predominantly is that there are, in many cases, only a few, in many cases less than a half a dozen or a dozen fundamental principles that apply to each of these areas. Now, I think if you focus on those areas of study first, then what you'll find is that you start developing positive attitude about life and you become a little bit more positive and expectant about the beauties of life. Then you can then focus on what I call the other areas of the education system or the learning system. Everything I've shared with you now is predominantly personal development. It's about developing self. Then you can move to the areas like academic education and learning, or professional learning and education, or you can even go as far as financial education and learning. But I think those are the key areas you should actually focus on learning. And you begin, like I said, with information gathering. That becomes knowledge. You move into a state whereby if you think about it long enough and if you process the ideas long enough and if you study and ask questions, you start to comprehend, and then you have understanding. And finally, if you then have the courage, the tenacity to then take action, that becomes what we call wisdom, because you're applying that knowledge you have, you're getting results, and you're making improvements. So let me leave this with you. And I think it's important to ponder on this final statement. The quality of your life today is based on the quality of the decisions you've made so far. The quality of the decisions you made were based on the quality of your thinking at the time. The quality of the thinking you had were based on the questions you were asking. The questions you were asking were based on the information you had, the knowledge you had. However, your life doesn't get better, as most people think, by chance. Life gets better by decisions. Desires combined with decisions is how life begins to change. If you have a burning desire to change your life for the better, and you're willing to make the right decisions, then very easily you're willing to study, learn, gather the information, and then take the action steps and make the corrective steps necessary for you to achieve the goal that you want. So I want to wish you all the best. I want to thank you again for today's session. And I believe that everyone here has the ability to become whoever they choose to be. I believe every one of you has the ability to reach your true potential. The potential is given. The achievement of the potential has to be earned. I'll say that again. Your potential has been given to you already, and it's unlimited. The achievement of that potential, you have to earn. And you earn that process, and you earn that potential by beginning firstly with deciding how to learn. I'm baffled, and I can relate to this because I did this for so many years in my life. I'm baffled at how many people start life as though it's a sprint. And they just take off. And many people are going nowhere. They have no sense of direction because they haven't sat down and said, how do things work? And then what information do I need to ensure that I can make things work for me? And my best gift to you today would be to suggest that before you embark on any area of life, that you sit down and ask yourself, how do things work? And then you decide to study and then apply. Because if you want to be successful, you have to study success. If you want to be healthy, you have to study health. If you want to be wealthy, you have to study wealth. If you want to be happy, you must study happiness. If you want to be joyful, study joy. Just in the same way, if you want to become a doctor, you have to study some form of information or knowledge that is relevant to being a doctor. Life begins first as a study. Then it becomes a practice. Then it becomes a lifestyle. So I wish you all the best, and I hope that you achieve your dreams and goals, whatever they might be.